So we see the Arabs at this time, they had the zeal to learn the lineage and to respect this language that they had. This was an eloquent language. We said it was a balagha, a very powerful speech. And as a result of this powerful speech, they also mastered the art of poetry. So they had a lot of good memorization techniques. They used to memorize poetry, they used to focus on the spoken word, and this also made it easier for them when the Quran came, to memorize the Quran, to recite the Quran. And it's mentioned that if an Arab owned a camel, and if some guests had come to visit, he would without delay slaughter this camel and feed it to his guests. Sa'id ibn Zayd, he wanted Jannah for his family. And he asked the Prophet ﷺ, now what's going to happen to my father? So the Prophet ﷺ said, on the day of judgment, your father, Zayd ibn Amr, he will be resurrected as one ummah on the day of judgment. Meaning he will be a one-man ummah on the day of judgment because of his monotheism at the time. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Dear brothers and viewers online, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we've now reached our third session, and we can see now that the scene is setting up nicely for the coming of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of the brothers have already started to ask me that when am I going to start talking about the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's a lot of information before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that one needs to sift through: the economic, social, cultural, political environment at the time, the religions in Arabia at the time. So I need to be selective about presenting the information at hand in a way which is easily understood and accessible to the ummah. So inshallah, this week we're going to be talking a little bit about pre-Islamic Arabia again, and we're going to be focusing on the social aspects of Arabia. And last week I mentioned that there were some people in Arabia at the time who were known as Hanafiya. So we'll mention inshallah some of these people who were on the way of monotheism. And then inshallah next week we'll start to talk a little bit about the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then we'll talk about his birth inshallah. We discussed last week pre-Islamic Arabia, and we mentioned some of the conditions which were prevalent at the time. We went back to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. We discussed the Arabs at the time, that they were initially on the Sharia of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and one person, Amr ibn Luhayl al-Khuzai, he changed the religion of Ismail. He introduced idolatry into Mecca. He was the chieftain of his tribe, and his words were taken as law during his time. We mentioned he changed the talbiyah, labbaik Allahumma labbaik, he added some lines into it. And when the Arabs at that time, they were doing the tawaf, they used to indulge in practices where they used to go around the Kaaba unclothed, meaning naked. So some of these were the pre-Arabian customs, and we see the situation in the society at the time. We mentioned last week that one of the companions, he mentioned, and this was an authentic narration in Bukhari, that before Islam came along, they used to pick up a stone and worship it. And then when they found a better stone, they used to chuck the old one, first one away, and take the better stone. And if they couldn't find anything, they used to gather some dirt together, get a milk and milk the sheep, or the sheep on top of the soil, and make it firm, and then do tawaf around it. So this was the situation of the people at the time. And sometimes we need to be careful, especially when we go to Mecca in modern day, when we go for the Umrah, when we go for the Hajj. We see many people, they go into the Haram and they get involved in doing acts of bid'ah, acts of innovation. We see people jumping around, rubbing their arms on places in the masjid, trying to gain a blessing from this. And sometimes we even see the security people there at the time. where if there's a place where they see you doing any type of shirk or any type of innovation, they will warn you that this is not something that the Prophet ﷺ did not do. And we see this in the hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab as well, that he came to the black stone, al-Hajr al-Aswad, and he said, I know that you are only a stone, which can neither bring benefit or nor it can cause harm. So were it not that I saw the Prophet ﷺ kiss you, I would not have kissed you. So this is very, very important. That Umar ibn al-Khattab here is saying, whatever the Prophet ﷺ taught us, we will go and we will do. If we did not see the Prophet ﷺ kissing the stone, he would not go and kiss the stone. So this is something to bear in mind. You know, for example, when we do the tawaf, and we come to the third corner, Rukn al-Yamani, the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to walk past the Rukn al-Yamani, he used to wipe his hand over the stone. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that this is, when you walk past this stone and you wipe your hands over the stone, it's erasing of the sins. But sometimes we see nowadays, there's so much traffic in that area, people start to wave their hands when they go past the Rukn al-Yamani. So if you can't touch the stone, you're not supposed to wave your hand. And we see other people jumping around, getting their jubbas, getting their hats and rubbing their hats on the stone. So all of these things are things which are not practiced by the Prophet ﷺ, and we need to be careful. Otherwise our situation, may Allah save us, will become like the Arabs at that time, where they were just trying to do anything for the worship, and then they diluted shirk in this worship. So let's talk a little bit about the social life of the Arabs. We mentioned last week the harms of drinking and gambling, and this was prevalent in the Arabian society at the time. And having a lot of drink at that time meant that people had issues with issues with health. We mentioned a lot of ills of alcohol at the time, and it also led to debt. People who were gambling, people who were heavy drinkers, it led to debt and also consuming interest. Because if somebody's hooked, they want to buy the alcohol, they want to go and gamble, they want to lend money, and sometimes they'll lend that money based on interest and compound interest. So it was a never-ending misery at the time. And we see in Arabia at the time, the rich people, they used to take advantage of the poor. When we look at the status of women in society at the time, this varied widely according to the cultural norms and the tribes that the women belonged to. We see that in the elite tribes, the women, they were respected, and sometimes the tribes, wars broke out between tribes in the defense of the women. And then if we look at the lower class of the tribes, sometimes women, they were regarded as commodities in society. But this was not limited to the lower classes. Obscenity, adultery, fornication, prostitution, this was heavily rampant in this society. But at the same time, the Arabs, they also had some good ethics and some good morals. So let's look at some of the good ethics and good morals that the Arabs had. One of the good things that they had was, a lot of the Arabs, they had a powerful memory. Many of the Arabs, they mastered the art of genealogy, which is ilmun nasab. So this is all about the study of the family, the history, the tracing of the lineage, the roots. And this is why when we see even the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, it goes back many generations, because this was part of the Arab culture. The Arabs, they respected this as an art, and they spent a lot of time to memorize their fathers and their forefathers. And this was something which was built into their culture. Today we see in our society, forget lineage, people are losing languages. Because you see second, third, fourth generation, just an example I can give you of where I come from back home, we speak the language Kokon. And we see the people that have migrated out of India and they've come to places like the UK or South Africa. South Africa, they're in their third, fourth generation now. So when I've been to South Africa and I speak to their kids, they can't speak a word of this language. They know our roots are from Kokon, but that's all it is. Or everybody in their language either speaks Afrikaans or English. And this is the same thing that's happening in this country as well. We see the kids myself, because my mother used to speak the language with me, I can speak the language. But now my sister's children, they can't speak a word of Kokan. So we see the language is getting lost. So we see the Arabs at this time, they had the zeal to learn the lineage and to respect this language that they had. This was an eloquent language. We said it was a balagha, a very powerful speech. And as a result of this powerful speech, they also mastered the art of poetry. So they had a lot of good memorization techniques. They used to memorize poetry. They used to focus on the spoken word. And this also made it easier for them when the Quran came, to memorize the Quran, to recite the Quran. So this was one good ethic they had, which was powerful memories. Another good ethic they had was generosity and hospitality in society. So the Arabs, they took pride in this. And we see every time when the Hajj came around, the annual gathering of the Hajj, when people came to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Arabs, they were known for respecting the Hujjaj and providing community services for the Hujjaj. Meaning they used to provide soup, sometimes bread with soup for the people. They used to provide them with water. They used to provide for their needs. And it's mentioned that if an Arab owned a camel and if some guests had come to visit, he would without delay slaughter this camel and feed it to his guests. Many narrations at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, he stands up in the masjid and he says, I have a guest. Who will take care of my guest this evening? So one person, he stands up and he says, O Prophet of Allah, I will take care of your guest. He goes home and he speaks to his wife. And he speaks to his wife and he says, prepare the food. And she says, Subhanallah, we only have enough food for the baby. So what is his response? His response is, lull the baby to sleep, and when you're serving the food, put out the lights, and this way we will stay hungry and our guest will eat to his fill. So this is the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that poverty became their lot. They preferred others over themselves, and although poverty became their lot. So this is the love that the Arabs had for serving the people, for serving the community. Another good ethic is that they kept a covenant, even if it meant the cost of one's life and property. Meaning that if they promised something to somebody, they never broke that promise. Auf ibn Nu'man, he said during the pre-Islamic era, that it is better for me to die out of thirst than to break a promise. So we see how highly they regarded a promise. And even when the Prophet ﷺ, he came, the hadith is in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said that there are 3 signs of a hypocrite. If he speaks, he lies, and if he promises, he breaks the promise, and if he is entrusted, he betrays this trust. So we see many a time, even before the Prophet ﷺ, he became the Prophet of Allah, there was a situation that took place. We'll talk about it in a couple of weeks' time. This is the pact of Hilf al-Fudul, which is standing up for social justice in society. And we see a group of people, they came together to stand up for the rights of the oppressed at that time. One thing which was also common was the bravery and courage of the Arabs. So they prided themselves on this bravery and courage. If anyone as much as dared to attack their clan's integrity or their honor, they would defend it with their lives. So sometimes we did see that the Arabs, they got into ego battles or battles of unworthy dispute. And some Arabs, they fought other Arabs until there was an evil end. But there were some Arabs in the community, in the society at that time, who were standing up for justice, who were standing up for peace, and they were standing up for the orphans and the needy at this time. And they would consider it an insult to themselves, their tribes and their communities, or a grave mishap, meaning that there's a situation in front of them where they can change the situation for the better, yet they're not doing anything to make this situation better. So these are some of the good ethics of the Arabian community at the time. We mentioned that there were a couple of other religions in Arabia at the time, and this was the Jewish and Christian community. I'm not really going to dwell much into the Jewish community, but just to understand a little bit about how the Jewish and Judaism spread across Arabia, the Romans, they destroyed Jerusalem. And when this took place, the Jews, they dispersed. Some came down to Arabia in search of the promised land where the Prophet will be sent. They had signs that the awaited Prophet would come from their books. And they saw some of these signs in Medina. So many of the Jewish tribes, they settled in Medina, also known previously as Yathrib. And we know of the Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayza. And similarly, the Christians as well. They started dispersing in the land of Arabia, and they started to settle in different parts of Arabia. So I want to focus now, in the final part of the session, on a handful of people. And we mentioned these handful of people, they were known as Hanif, which is singular, or the plural is Hanafiya. And this basically means turning away from shirk and turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran, He uses the words Hanafiya. Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanita lillahi hanifa. So there was a handful of people, we'll go through them very briefly. One person was known as Qus ibn Sa'ida. Qus ibn Sa'ida, he wasn't from the Quraysh, but he was from the tribe of Banu Iyad. And he was an old man when the Prophet ﷺ met him as a young person. He used to come for the annual Hajj, and he used to preach out against idolatry. So imagine this person from the Banu Iyad coming for the annual pilgrimage, and while people are doing the tawaf, while people are doing the rituals of Hajj, he used to call out these people and preach against idolatry. So this shows us that he was upon the fitrah. He was upon monotheism at the time. He was very eloquent in his speech, and he used poetry to steer people away from idolatry at the time. One of the things that he said, "O people of Iyad, where is Thamud? Where is Ad? Where are your fathers and where are your grandfathers?" So we can see the poetic language is being used. And he said, "Who will reward the one who has done good but has never been rewarded? And who will punish the one who has done injustice but has never been punished?" Meaning that he's referencing the day of judgment. That a person in society can do good but not be rewarded. And similarly, a person in society can do injustice but he cannot be punished. And then he said, "I swear by Allah that there must be a religion better than the religion that all of you are upon." Because this was before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ's prophethood. The Prophet ﷺ met this man when he was a young boy. Now, many years later, in around the 9th year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ, this was roughly about 40 years after Qus ibn Sa'ida. And when the Banu Iyad, they came to the Prophet ﷺ to accept Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ, he inquired about this man. That when I was a young boy, I saw this man, Qus ibn Sa'ida. What happened to him? And they said, "O Prophet of Allah, he died many years ago." So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Remind me of some of his poetry." And then they said some of these words which I just mentioned in the English language. And the Prophet ﷺ, he liked this poetry because it was very similar to resembling the Quran. So this was one person. And then we have a narration from Ibn Hisham. He narrates regarding 4 or 5 people, another 4 people who were on the Hanafiya at the time. And he mentions that the Quraysh, they had a huge festival one day outside of Mecca. And they invited the entire city to go out to celebrate with their idols. But 4 people, they remained behind. And these 4 people, as they remained behind in the city of Mecca, they realized that they were upon the same fitrah, which was monotheism. They were upon the same wavelength. So they spoke to each other and they said, "Let us befriend ourselves and not tell anybody about our affair. We know that our people, they have left the religion of Ibrahim. Let us go out and let us search for this religion of Ibrahim." So the first 2 people I'm going to talk about, we don't know much about them, but the final 2, we know quite a bit of information about them. So the first person was Ubaydullah ibn Jahsh, and he was the Prophet's cousin. The Prophet's aunt was his mother, and he accepted Islam at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ, and he got married to Habiba ibn Abi Sufyan. And then when the time for migration came to Abyssinia, they left for Abyssinia, but on arrival in Abyssinia, sometime later, Ubaydullah ibn Jash, he became murtad, meaning he left the fold of Islam, and then as a result of this, Habiba, she came back to Mecca. So we see that even at this time when he became murtad in the non-Muslim lands, he was a person who was free. Because, a lot of people, they attack Islam. That, if a person becomes a murtad, he leaves the fold of Islam, what's the capital punishment? We see here from this that when he went into the land of the Negus, he was free, he left Islam, and he was free to do what he wanted. And even if a person in an Islamic land becomes a murtad, he has to stand trial. People forget this, he has to stand trial. This is very important. So this was the first person who, unfortunately, he left Islam, and he went into the path of Christianity. The second person was Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith. And he left Mecca. All we know about him is that he left Mecca, he went to Rome, and he worked in the palaces of Caesar as an interpreter. And he died upon Christianity. So these are the first two people. Then we have one person, which is a very famous name, all of us should know it, Waraqa ibn Nawfal ibn Asad. And if we are familiar with the story of the Prophet ﷺ going into the cave of Hira, the revelation coming down, and then the Prophet ﷺ running back home to Khadija radiallahu anha and saying, "Dhammiluni, dhammiluni, cover me, cover me." She took him, who did she take him to? Waraqa ibn Nawfal. So we have Waraqa ibn Nawfal ibn Asad on one side, and then we have Khadija ibn Khuwaylid ibn Asad. So meaning Waraqa ibn Nawfal's father and Khadija's father, they had the same father. So we can see the family tree now. So Khadija's grandfather and Waraqa ibn Nawfal's grandfather was the same person. So we see that Waraqa ibn Nawfal, he went out for many years and he researched, and eventually he chose Christianity. And we see at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the revelation came to him, and Khadija radiallahu anha takes the Prophet ﷺ to Waraqa ibn Nawfal. Many people, they say that the first Muslim, the first convert to Islam, convert to Islam was Abu Bakr. But actually the scholars, they say that it was Waraqa ibn Nawfal. Because when the Prophet ﷺ, he went to Waraqa ibn Nawfal and he asked that who is this, what is this thing I saw, this entity? And Waraqa ibn Nawfal, he said, this is Jibreel, the same one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to Musa, the same one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to Isa. And he is the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to the prophets of Allah. Then what did Waraqa ibn Nawfal say? That I wish I would be a young man, so I could support you when your people drive you out of your land and they persecute against you. So here we see the support of Waraqa ibn Nawfal for the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ didn't know what was happening to him at this time. And we see Waraqa ibn Nawfal, he said this was the sign that we have all been waiting for. No sooner had he said this, Khadija radiallahu anha, she mentions a few weeks later he passed away. So he was actually the first person to believe and accept Islam. And then we have finally Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl. He was the cousin of Umar ibn al-Khattab ibn Nufayl. And he's got a very interesting story because he had a few interactions with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he didn't become a Jew or he didn't adopt the Christian faith, but rather it is reported that he went to the Jewish rabbis and he went to the Christian priests and he said to them that this is not the religion of Ibrahim, meaning what you're following is not the religion of Ibrahim and you know it. And once he said to the people of Mecca that, O people of Mecca, O people of Quraysh, there is no one left upon the religion of Ibrahim except me. Meaning all of you people in this society, you have left the religion of Ibrahim except myself. Now Asma bint Abu Bakr. Who's Asma bint Abu Bakr? She is the older sister of Aisha radiallahu anha. She was approximately 20 years older than Aisha radiallahu anha. And she mentions she used to remember the time when Zayd ibn Amr, he used to go out and he used to tell off the Quraysh for serving food to the idols and burying their daughters alive. We mentioned that burying the daughters alive was a pre-Arabian custom and some tribes practiced this. But Zayd ibn Amr, it's mentioned about him that when any person of the Quraysh wanted to kill his daughter, he used to go to them and said, if you have no need for your daughter, give your daughter to me, I will adopt her, I will look after her. So if any Quraysh wanted to kill his daughter, he used to go and save their lives. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was young, he asked Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail that what is the matter between you and your people, because the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted to know, and he could see that Zayd ibn Amr is having these disputes with the people in the community. And Zayd said, I can't bow down to these idols. And now we see, during the time when the Prophet ﷺ was a young boy, he had a pure fitrah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved his heart. He never worshipped an idol before he became a prophet, and he never bowed down to an idol. So we see here that the same inclination that the Prophet ﷺ had, this person has the same fitrah running in his body. And he died 5 years before the Prophet ﷺ started preaching Tawheed. Now the son of Zayd ibn Amr is Sa'id ibn Zayd. Who is Sa'id ibn Zayd? He is one of the Ashara Mubashara, one of the 10 who were guaranteed paradise in this life. There were 10 companions of the Prophet ﷺ. These were the best of the best of the best. And the Prophet ﷺ in this life, he guaranteed them Jannah. So Sa'id ibn Zayd, he eventually married Fatima bint al-Khattab, who was the sister of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he mentions many years later that he asked the Prophet ﷺ that, O Prophet of Allah, you know my father, he was a good man. He didn't worship these idols. You know what he was upon. What is his situation going to be in the Akhirah? Now, this is the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to the family in today's day and age. We all have our family at home. We feel relaxed. We feel love and compassion towards our family members, especially those who have become Muslim and they know the situation of their parents who are not Muslim. They will feel for their parents and they will pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala each and every day that, oh Allah, guide my parents to Islam. Because this is very important. So similarly, what you want to have, we all want to have Jannah. So Sa'id ibn Zayd, he wanted Jannah for his family. And he asked the Prophet ﷺ, now what's going to happen to my father? So the Prophet ﷺ said, on the day of judgment, your father, Zayd ibn Amr, he will be resurrected as one ummah on the day of judgment. Meaning he will be a one-man ummah on the day of judgment because of his monotheism at the time. And he mentions further that the Prophet ﷺ, when he went for Isra wal Miraj, when he came back, he said to Sa'id ibn Zayd, the son of Zayd ibn Amr, he said that when I went for Isra wal Mi'raj, I was shown Jannah and I saw not one but 2 gardens being given to your father. So we see through this that he was upon the fitrah, he was upon monotheism at the time, and the Prophet ﷺ confirmed that he will be in Jannah. So this inshallah concludes our session for today. We learnt about the people who were upon monotheism at the time before the coming of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And inshallah next week we'll start to talk a little bit about the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his father, his grandfather, and a couple of generations on. And then inshallah we'll start to talk about the birth of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to act upon what has been said. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.